Hi, and welcome to The Working World. I'm Karen Mendez.
And I'm Jamie Lingham. I tell you what, Karen, I went into today's show thinking, oh, tax, and I'm sorry to say, but I'm not afraid to say that I'm sure, and I'm not alone to say that, that's how I went into it. But I've got to honestly tell you, that was such an interesting session. We had Ursula Dyer, Lepporoli, who is the partner of Global Mobility and tax leader of Victoria and Australia for KPMG. And wow, I mean, tax nerd, she owned it, she ran with it, she loved it.
If anybody can make tax exciting, Ursula can.
Agree.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. There was, apart from the really amazing analogies, I think there was a car and a scuba diving one in there. But that aside, in all seriousness, it covered organisational considerations, employee considerations, hybrid working, domestic tax filings for Australia, you name it, we covered
global
it.
Travel, data, cross-data sharing, everything that countries can do to sort of make sure that they're getting their fair share of your income. It had it all, absolutely. So I think, it's as I said, it's one of those things. I read the title, oh, okay, tax, but it's been really, really amazing.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, enjoy, guys, and we'll hand over to Ursula now. Hi, Ursula. Welcome to The Working World. Nice to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Have you met Jamie? Which side is he on?
Ursula. Hey. How are you? I know, it's always the fun of Zoom. Ursula, I'm so excited to hear all of your wisdom. I know that you have a great background in the tax area, the international tax area. And I think that, while it's probably not, it's one of those topics that I think that people need to get a better grasp on and see how well we can use tax to actually not only benefit ourselves, but also attract and retain people from overseas. And I think more specifically in this post-COVID world, because, I think that what we'll find out is this probably has been some changes and there's different ways of thinking that definitely wouldn't have happened in a pre-COVID world.
Oh, definitely. I think attracting talent with tax probably is not on the tip of everyone's tongues, but it's possible.
Hey, and you know what? That's what we want to hear, right? We want to learn about how to unlock this Pandora's box of gems and just different things. And I mean, let's face it, at the moment with the war for talent that we're going through, and it is a bit of a war, I think. And it's not just Australia, it's every country around the world, which I find interesting. But Karen, I think you're going to kick us off.
Yeah, no, not at all. And it's a very nice segue into my first question. I'm going to dive right in. Because, as Jamie's mentioned, there's been a heavy focus around the war for talent and then therefore employee experience and establishing attractive hybrid working policies within lots of organisations. But I wonder how many HR professionals have actually considered the tax implications of some of those policies or the thinking around that and how tax compliance fits into, the new world of working essentially. So I wondered whether you could share with us your views and predictions around this, and then whether perhaps, you believe remote working will be able to challenge, I guess, some of the existing or old systems in relation to tax residency around the world.
Yeah, no worries. So I think the employees in the driver's seat now, and employers are really trying to keep them inside their car. And
totally, that's great. I love it. Yeah, so true, isn't it? It's like, sit down, stay here, put the seatbelt on a bit tighter.
It is. And what I'm seeing is line managers are wanting to be compassionate and, providing approval for travel and working remotely, but not really understanding the issues. So I think, Karen, to your question, it goes beyond even HR. HR has to be responsible for educating the line managers and making sure that policy that the companies decide to take is clear for everyone so that they have the information to be able to do their job and take care of their people. What I'm seeing is many organizations don't know exactly where all of their employees actually are. We've all proven we can take our laptop and work at home. So, who's to say my home can't be in another country? And so I don't think that, they are aware of where they're at or the implications that can arise if there is a problem. So I think everyone's kind of in this awakening phase. If I can say post-COVID, I'm not sure in all jurisdictions that flies at this stage, but we're all kind of realizing what we need to do, where people are at, and the policies that we need to make that happen. I think what we're seeing is a rise in the digital nomad visas. Now, I know you guys have listeners around the world. It's not necessarily so popular in this ASPAC region that we find ourselves in. There's not a lot of countries picking it up just yet, but I think we're seeing it around Europe and other places. And I think that kind of tempts people, but I think it also exposes the gap on where you can actually really work. And Jamie, you'd be all over this as an immigration professional.
Yeah.
So I think the reality is that you can't necessarily legally do the work that you want to do from wherever it is that you want to do it from. And then the tax, is the next question that you need to be asking. So there's nothing more messy and painful than being told that someone in your team has been in another country for months and months and you didn't know about it. If go on, Dyer, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say that just fascinates me, right? Because I suppose immigration hat off and employer hat on. I say to my team, look, if you guys want to go work overseas, for 3 months, just go do it. It doesn't matter, because if you can manage your workload and sometimes not having that live time interruption of return emails if you're working through someone else's night is obviously hugely beneficial. And I've got to say, I didn't even give it a second thought on the whole tax implication. Which is
my eyes bulge when you said.
I was like, what? I knew the visa side of things. Like I got that, I ticked that box, but then the tax side of things. And I suppose the mind starts to boggle, because I think, well, what are the liabilities? Is it costing me more? Is it actually more beneficial for me to say, hey, Ursula, go overseas for 6 months? Is that more beneficial for me? Is it more beneficial for you? Or is it, I don't know, you're shaking your head. I'm in new territory here, right?
Look, I think it's good to ask the questions. I don't think you can have a blanket, is it more beneficial for me or you type answer to it. You got to do the work. So some of the work that I'm doing with clients, they're finding out, someone's been abroad. I had a client, I think it was Malaysia. They went over there, the family was over there, they got stuck. The wife was pregnant, ended up having the baby, and they ended up just extending because of the new baby and not wanting to put it on a plane and come straight back. So it's just things, life is happening. And so you've just got to kind of navigate the tax along with it. If anything, I think we're entering into an era where communication is key. So companies need to have a position on what it is. So Jamie, you're really kind. You're letting people go out for the 3 months, and that's cool. Yeah. But it's great that you've actually established what your position is. And then people can navigate what they want to do with their flexibility within a framework. So I don't think that anybody can just have a go do whatever you like policy. I guess that's not even a policy.
Yeah.
How does this work, Ursula, with the existing tax systems within foreign jurisdictions? I think one of the big things for me is it's an out of sight, out of mind thing, especially with tax. So there's a lack of knowledge, right? And communication is needed around the tax implications of working abroad. But then there's almost kind of like, well, I think there might be some implications for me as an employee, but if I don't look, I might not know. And so if I just cross a border, how are they going to know that I did that?
Yeah.
Right.
Look, I think we're going to chat later about data, which is one of my favorite topics, but I think more and more increasingly, they're going to know. And the last thing that you want as an employee is to be, the one that gets caught out and turned around. Jamie, I'm sure you've had people who've arrived in countries and with a bit of questioning.
Yeah.
If the right
with
official,
knife set, if they're a chef, or, cameras or whatever, like, are you coming for work? No, I'm just going to do a private dinner party. Like, really? You want to...
I mean, and now, the US is doing things with what was at one point looking at people's phones and whatnot. So I think that thinking that you can, close your eyes and just walk through the immigration line and not be telling them that you're going to be working, that's not a smart thing to do. No. They're looking at records and they will find out. So I think you have to have a position, a process, and governance. So I think it's important that, you set up what you're going to do, but if you actually never go back and check it out and see where people are at and have a way of tracking that, then you might as well not have a policy. And then all those the work that you did to ensure that you weren't creating a permanent establishment in another country. So for those of you who aren't tax geeks, that's having a certain level of control and activity happening in another country. That means that potentially a part of the profits from the company are taxable in that other country. So if you had your CEO setting up shop in a different country because that's what they wanted to do for 3 months, red flags, PE risk, tax person not happy. So I think you've also, you can say, hey, someone might be able to go across and work for 30 days, but you actually then need to check and make sure that they come back. Because as I mentioned, life is happening. Someone got pregnant, someone got sick, and there are
COVID happened. You're stuck somewhere, you can't, totally.
Exactly. And they might not be doing it, on purpose or even know the implications. And that's why you need these processes and this governance to be able to say, okay, you've reached 6 months. That was the 6 months cap for a reason. Part of that is tax. You need to either stop working, take a leave of absence. Are you going to remain an employee? Like, you need to have another conversation at that point that tax is actually potentially triggering. So there's a popular saying, don't let the tax tail wag the dog, which is, have you ever heard that before, Jamie?
No.
This is saying it's not popular.
It's a new world for us, you know that, right?
Well, anyway, it's really a good reference point for making investment decisions. So, people are saying you can't let the tax tail wag the dog. But I think in this situation with remote work policies, that it's not the tail. Tax is not the tail anymore. It's at the head. It needs to be at the forefront before you create a disaster for yourself.
So sorry, you're saying, like, if I have employees, I say, look, go overseas, we've checked your visa work rights, and that's okay. You'll be able to operate in this fashion. Have I got my passport? Have I got my visa? Have I sorted out my tax? Should be in your top 3 checklists.
Absolutely, 100%.
Wow.
It's such a headache to go back and try to reverse engineer doing tax right from the beginning, and then you just increase your compliance costs. You'll definitely be ringing up a KPMG or somebody and saying, help me.
You're like, Ursula, come on, I'm stuck at the border. I haven't worked out my tax.
Yeah. So I think you also have that, the risk as a company. You don't want to end up on the front page because you've got people doing things they shouldn't be doing. So best just do your homework up front.
Okay, interesting. So when it comes to tax residency, could you tell us a little bit about that?
I was actually just explaining to a candidate who was interviewing for a role at our team about how historically our systems have been built around residence, and where you're residing, where you're sleeping at night, where you're heading into the office is where you get taxed. And so that's all turned up on its head now. We've got companies using all sorts of methods to kind of get the work done. That includes virtual assignments, individuals setting up their home office in a third country even. And that's becoming more prevalent as we're seeing countries like China, where the restrictions for COVID are still so prevalent that they're not necessarily wanting to travel there. So they're saying, I'm actually going to set up shop in Singapore. So now you've suddenly got this third country because it's closer to China. And so they want to go there. But what do you do? And where are they a resident? And where do you tax the income? So that's kind of what people are working through right now. I actually spent a few years living in Perth. And I had lots of clients who were FIFO. And for those of you who aren't mining nerds, that's fly in, fly out. So they go in, they do their bit, and they go home. And so we had people who would decide, actually, I don't want to go back to my home. I want to go and live in a third country because I want to sit by the beach when I'm not at the mine site. And this would require that companies decide on the position. Are you going to, provide tax support in that third location? Do you even want to know? Are you doing the we don't? Here's your plane ticket. Go wherever you want.
Good luck. I'm feeling like I'm on that side at the moment.
Don't do it.
I'm going to be honest to you here.
I mean, and I think that's in this FIFO situation, I think that's pretty reasonable. Like, who cares where you're going on your time off? That's fine. But what I think is I know that creates a complexity. And our current systems aren't necessarily designed for, are you a resident in 3 countries? Who gets to tax that? It starts to get very complicated. And I think with work from anywhere, we're just increasing that challenge even further. So if I could, I thought that I might also take a moment and talk about retirement and savings and how tax
Yeah.
goes with that.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really important part of every conversation we should be having about expats. People are living longer. We won't be I won't be working forever. And creating a pool of funds and investments to live off of is really important. And countries have done a lot of work to try to create tax effective systems. But when you're moving from one employer and then you're moving around potentially in different countries, that can be difficult. So if we go back to that example where I was talking about the FIFO worker, if that person was, let's say, a British citizen, and then they were going to Bali on their time off, and they thought, this is great, I love Bali, I'm going to retire in Bali because I've sorted out my visa situation, and I can. That employee is not going to be able to really get the most of our system in Australia, superannuation, for retirement savings. How? Why do I think that? They can get their superannuation entitlement out, but they've got to pay 35% tax when they leave the country. So the three of us on this call, when we retire, well, maybe not me because I'm a US citizen as well, so I have tax forever, but Karen, when you retire, you'll get your superannuation tax free. So there's already a disparity in that person's purchasing power and the money that they actually have because they've been subject to this additional tax. And so I think this is an important conversation, particularly as it increases with remote work. So if you're going to hire people in another country, and perhaps you're not going to be participating in putting money into any benefit scheme for retirement because they're not in Australia, they're sitting over in Timbuktu. Do you feel like as trying to be an employer of choice, there's somewhere for you to actually have a policy that looks after people with their retirement? Is that something you should be considering? Is that a differentiator in this war for talent that you were just talking about, Jamie, that says, hey, I've actually considered this, and I think you're going to have a problem in 30 years when you want to retire, when you don't have any tax effective savings? Because
you'll still be with us and we'll be here to help you into that retirement. That's how long you're staying. Yeah, I like where you're going with this. I really do.
No, it's acknowledging that we're not going to have one employer. You're not going to stay there for life, but maybe we should be trying to help you figure this out.
Add value. Yeah.
And that's just my little. I like to talk about retirement and savings because it also goes into another topic with the gap between men and women. But this is not about that, right?
We'll come back for another podcast on that one.
Fair enough.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the mind does boggle that there's so many different combinations of what people will have to consider, and I've just loved the start of this because it feels like I think that traditionally talking about tax hasn't been, to your point, at the top of anyone's list when talking about global mobility. But what it feels a bit like scuba diving, right? You don't realize there's this whole amazing world under there and all this sort of cool stuff you can do. So thank you for shedding the light and showing us a little bit of your little world under there.
I'm loving these analogies today. These are brilliant. Cars, scuba diving.
Yeah,
stick around.
There's more to come.
This is only the first part.
It's 2 parts. Just kidding. It's one podcast.
The tax roller coaster that we're on.
Okay, maybe title with that. Okay, serious face. Because we're talking about tax. So can you share with us some of the implications of source of income allocating tax rights?
Yeah,
especially
no worries.
for all those people who love that stuff.
Look, I think it's a lot to think about, but during the pandemic, we were forced to think about it. So we saw the ATO interpreting the existing legislation that we have to allow taxpayers that were stuck in Australia. So, people felt uncomfortable in different places and they came back home to Australia and they were doing their roles in Australia, but they were really like the role for Thailand or whatever other country they had been in. And they had all the intentions of going back to those countries once it was safe to do so. So we saw the ATO applying the legislation in a manner that allowed them not to be taxed in Australia on that income in some situations. And that was a bit of a one-off. And the time for that, application of the legislation is past now. And so now, in my opinion, we're approaching a moment in time where OECD countries, so, big, wealthy countries need to, and everyone else really, all the countries need to consider where individuals are going to pay their income tax. So is it based on residency? Is it based on the company that's paying the individual, or is it some third option? Is it something like where you laid your head last night is where you're going to pay your tax? I think there's been a lot of focus in the market around tax morality, and everyone gets up in arms when big companies don't pay their fair share.
Mm-hmm.
I think eventually we're going to start turning that light on individuals and where they're actually paying their tax and the source of that income. So who gets the right to tax it is that discussion. The countries, some countries are offering exemptions. Those digital nomads visas, they're sometimes offering, you don't have to pay tax here. So you can come, you can hang out, and you don't have to pay any tax. And they're doing that because they know people are going to spend. They're going to contribute to their economies. And
I think they're doing that in the Caribbean, right?
100%. Yeah.
I saw this, come live and, be part of, like, work remotely. I was like, come on, I'm signing up. This is me.
It sounds really good, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What's the catch?
You would have to work out if you were remaining a resident in Australia. So Jamie, if you stayed being a resident in Australia, then you'd probably still get taxed in Australia. So that's probably the downer on that. But should you become a non-resident in Australia and you were only, a resident in another country and they weren't taxing you, it sounds awesome, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But I think that they know that they're going to get all that GST or equivalent in that country. So they're still going to win. I think no one in the world.
Spending there, right, as well. You're investing in their economy.
Yeah. It's a way for them to
spend them here. Yeah.
I don't think we're anywhere near getting a digital nomad visa that is tax-free. No one wants to see,
the ability. A skill shortage.
You could say you're somewhere, but really be somewhere else, right?
Look, Karen, I think that would solve our skill shortage. Come to Australia, pay no tax.
Mm-hmm.
I tell you what.
Then you guys would think that tax was cool. So I think
I'm thinking it's cool already. You got me, okay? I leaned in. I'm engaged. I'm loving this.
But I think it's an interesting conversation that we all need to have. It affects us all. So if we have people coming in, they're contributing to all the systems that we have in a society. So tax is important, and I love it because it's actually funding the roads, the infrastructure, the police, the garbage collection, everything that makes society work. So I think collectively we've got some work to do to figure out where people are going to pay their tax.
Mm-hmm. So, question, with all these, emergence of BPOs, it's been going on pre-COVID and obviously through COVID, post-COVID. So if I'm putting outsourcing, which we don't, but say, for example, I was a company who outsourced into, say, the Philippines, for example, and that person is working for, Absent Immigration in the Philippines, and they had a remote login and they were like my employee. I mean, that sort of brings up a couple of questions to me. I mean, what's my level of liability on these overseas workers? It doesn't have to be the Philippines and it doesn't have to be Australia, but I just think at what stage do people or governments get their hands, on some of this revenue?
Well, that's
who gets the revenue.
From an individual perspective, the classic systems have been based on where that person is a resident. So that person who's sitting in the Philippines, working every day from their home or their office in the Philippines, would be paying the tax on their individual income in the Philippines. There's a broader discussion going on about where the company profits get taxed and how that's fair, but that unfortunately is beyond my expertise. So I'll stay in my little wheelhouse.
Because I was sort of thinking, right, because my company's benefiting from outsourcing, and so therefore I'm making the tax. And
that's that whole tax morality conversation. That is definitely very important that people are having.
Yeah. The that piece you're just talking about around where someone's going to be taxed. I have an Australian specific question, if I could. Do you think there is a time that we would see Australian citizens be similar to New Zealand and UK, where there's no need for us to do a tax return, assuming it's a basic filing, of course? Is that in the pipeline at all? Possibly?
This isn't a personal question, is it, Karen?
No, not at all. Love doing tax returns.
I think it has to do with data. And so I was reading an article on the ABC the other night, and they were analyzing some of the recently released tax data, which the most current year is 2020. And while the headline read 60 millionaires who paid no tax, it was no surprise to read that 2.3 million Australians declared rental income to the ATO that year. So given that the average house at that time was worth more than $500,000, you can see that there's a gap in what the data that the information is kind of getting directly from the market. So right now, they're getting information directly from banks. So all your interest, they're getting that. They're getting information from share registries. So all your dividend income, they're getting that. They're getting it from trusts and employers through single touch payroll. So if they could find a way to get real-time data on rental property income and expenses, then I feel, and I'm saying that because I feel like some of the average taxpayers, that basic tax filing that you referenced, those people have houses, they have rental properties. So if they could find a way to get that information in real time, then there wouldn't be much else to it apart from deductions. So I don't know how closely you followed the election campaign, 3 campaigns ago, so maybe like 6 or 7 years ago, someone started talking about a standard work deduction. So instead of us all, capturing our receipts for $200 every, whatnot, then instead the government would say, everybody gets $1,500. And if your expenses are less than $1,500, don't worry about it. We'll just give you $1,500. So I think the combination of enough information, which I think, give it 5 years, they'll probably have that rental gap closed. And a standard deduction so that people don't want to get in there and tinker with the return with, the $300 expense that costs them to do their tax return. Then I think we could get to a place where people don't have to lodge a return.
Fantastic. Doesn't that mean you'd be out of job?
Absolutely not.
No.
So I think what we're finding is that data is super important and the ATO has more of it. And so what we're finding is getting it right the first time with your payroll is super important. I think the days of fixing it up in a tax return. So, you have a foreign payroll going on and no one's done anything in Australia and we'll just lodge a tax return and report all the income and it'll be all good. The days of that are in the rearview mirror. Now we've got single touch payroll in Australia, which is that real-time reporting of employment income straight to the ATO. So they know a lot. They know so much information. In fact, I was talking to a partner and one of my colleagues, and he was saying he had a client who the government collected AUSTRAC information. So AUSTRAC, for those who don't know what it is an entity that's pretty much in charge of making sure people aren't money laundering, organized crime, terrorism financing, stuff like that. But anyway, they know what's happening with international movements of cash. So they took AUSTRAC information, immigration information, so when people were coming in and out, and maritime safety reporting. And they took a company who had kind of workers coming in on ships to do things and said, you didn't report on any of these people. Here's a default assessment for these employees, and here's some failure to withhold penalties for you, company.
Ouch.
So I think, data's the queen. I won't say the king because I feel like she's the queen, and the government has a lot of it, and they're doing things with it.
Yeah, I think that, and then it sort of makes me think like digital currency is going to be the next level, right? Because if you've got reserve banks who are introducing, Australia, I think, is trialing digital currency. I mean, there's nowhere to hide, right? Like everybody knows every cent you're spending. I think this is obviously very highly beneficial for governments. But then, I suppose, to Karen's point, so then if you're on the digital currency, when they just be like, okay, this is what you've earned, this is what you've moved, we've taxed you, thank you, and you don't even have to do anything, right? It's just done. Sounds like
that all sounds awesome. And I think Brazil is probably the most advanced country that I'm aware of in this space. So they've got almost everything in this system of real-time reporting. So instead of trying to track down 5 million dodgy taxpayers, individuals out there, they can just hone in on the 500 employers who they have a smell and sniff and feel like something's gone wrong. So I still think that there will be work in helping people sort out the payroll right in the first instance, because it's hard. Like if you want to keep someone on a foreign payroll and you don't want to put them on an Australian payroll, how are you going to do that? So I think shadow payrolls and the single touch payrolls, they're going to be the new tax return. Quoted here first.
Yeah, got it. We're gonna bookmark this. We're gonna speak to you about 12 to 18 months and see how you go.
So obviously technology plays a big part of that, Ursula. And I just wondered, just looking back to kind of hybrid working globally, you know, what do you think organizations will do when it comes to technology? And, you know, do you think that kind of data sharing is going to increase between organizations and tax regulators around the world?
100%, definitely. Yeah. I think that's definitely what's on the horizon. I think that there will be some temptation potentially for companies to say, oh, we like this person. They're sitting in India right now. It's really hard to get developers, but I'm going to get this Indian developer to start working. Actually, they're not an employee, they're a contractor. And I think, you know, that's a line that can't be crossed. And again, another situation where you've got to do the right thing because the governments are going to be paying attention. There's going to be audits. They can do payroll. They can figure out what's going on. So I would tempt people not to get lazy or try to find the easy way out and making people contractors. I think there's some interesting solutions out there like the employer of record and things like that to try to navigate this where people are hiring internationally and wanting to give people that flexibility. But do your homework and really figure out what's the right answer, and so you can sleep at night because the governments have so much information.
And I mean, employer of records, as I understand it, don't necessarily mitigate PE risk 100% either, right? So there's no kind of silver bullet around that, which is frustrating.
No. Look, I think they're a potential short-term solution for some instances, but I think there's never a silver bullet. There's always just do the hard work, figure out the right answer, and then go forward with that.
So you know, I know in Australia in particular, I'm not so sure about other jurisdictions, which you probably know, but we have, you know, data matching with the tax office and between the Department of Immigration. So obviously, if you're on a working visa that you've told the department that you're going to pay X, you know, per year, and they're banking on the fact that they're going to get sort of their little chunk of tax. I just wonder what your thoughts on how, because obviously that's a very country-specific system, how other countries will start to share data, or I mean, how legal that is and how much that'll occur.
There's already agreements in place. I can't remember exactly what the bill was called that allowed more sharing of information between countries that we had agreements with. So it's already happening. I wouldn't doubt, you know, America is definitely one of them where we're sharing information. I don't know that it's gotten to the level of we're all trying to protect our tax revenue. Let's, you know, find out where these people are really at and working. But as the systems get more sophisticated and the data is more accessible, then anything's possible for them to do any kind of data matching or auditing that they like to do.
Yeah, because what I'm thinking is, say, for example, I get on a plane and I go to the States and I want to work remotely, and because it's remote, nobody will really know. But then to your point earlier in the call or the discussion was that level of compliance. So if we have, you know, if I've been working in a country, so I'm on an ESTA, for example, on the just electronic travel visa, which has no work rights, but I've secretly been working away, and then my taxable income will be recorded in Australia. And then I wonder if America could go back and say, hey, you were in America all of August, but you've been recording income. And so we know that you're actually on the inappropriate visa. Guess what? Don't come back.
Imagine, you know what I mean? The power.
Because I'm in breach of visa conditions, 10-year ban. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. Look, imagine the power that real-time reporting will bring to that. The U.S. is a lot further behind than some of the smaller countries that have less people to deal with in the real-time reporting. But it's funny that you bring that up, because as a U.S. person, and that's probably the only other jurisdiction that I know with some level of detail, if I'm actually in the U.S. working, then that's classified as US sourced income. So even from day one.
As a US citizen or just as everyone?
No, a US citizen. It's my joy. So, so they've already kind of got that, you know, approach for US citizens when they come back to soil over there. I mean, you can look at treaties. There are treaties that allow you to, you know, navigate and potentially not end up with double tax happening, but it's just a complexity. It's the complexity that arises. And so people are preparing policies and work from anywhere agreements and whatnot with their employees that try to just eliminate getting into the territory where this is a problem. And that's where I start off the call saying, you gotta pick your position, and then you gotta agree kind of, where you want to sit on that, and then navigate the tax with that as well.
Yeah. And document well around that.
And then that governance. So you can say you can go over there for 3 months, but then you really need to make sure they come back.
Yeah, this there's this whole thing of birth tourism to the States where people turn up, super pregnant and have babies when they arrive, and everyone thinks, oh wow, it's really clever. They turn up with it, they get a US passport, and to me it's like, hang on, no, they get a worldwide tax. Like here's another taxpayer. Thank you, please come here, and I've got you forever, right?
Forever, yeah.
Forever, exactly. Tough to shake.
Ursula, I've had this question before, where an organisation has discovered and this predominantly happened during the pandemic. They had people displaced, but then they had people who have set up camp in other countries. And they've kind of realised after the fact they've got either a multi-jurisdictional kind of breach of compliance when it comes to tax. What would be kind of, maybe your top 3 or a couple of points of, what are the first actions an organisation should do should they discover that they've got, I guess, non-compliances in their mobile workforce? What should they kind of tackle?
The top 3 tips.
Yeah.
Top 3 tax tips.
Oh, hang on. I feel like one of those, like the top 3. And then we go, number 3. Number 2. Yeah, exactly. Let's get it. We could roll it in. We could re-edit this, right? We're like Ursula's top 3.
No, I think we should have like a drum roll. Like, okay,
well,
first
drum
one.
roll on the 1, right? Like the 3 coming in at number 3. Okay, sorry, let's keep going.
Look, well, it's probably in order of what you need to do them in. I think it's knowing your risk profile. So, one company might say, you were over there for 30 days. We didn't know about it. That's actually kind of our line in the sand. So we're just going to leave that as it is for now, because that's the position that we've taken on being in another country. Depending on not knowing what country it is and what the tax rules are, companies are going to have their positions that they're going to want to take based on the risk that they're willing to take on. I have one country that they send someone to Australia for a day, they're setting up superannuation, they're paying it out, they're paying payroll tax. So it just depends where you want to sit. And agree that with someone who knows what they're talking about. Get an advisor. And then I think it's worth reflecting on that in this post-COVID where we're sitting at with so many people moving around, to make sure that it's still fit for purpose, what you've set. The second thing I would say is to have a strong relationship with your service providers. So, information should flow, whether it's catch-ups or dashboards or whatever works for you. You should have a process so that you have no surprises. So I know you said sometimes you might figure it out, but I had a conversation with a company that was actually looking at VPNs. So there's no way that they're ever going to have someone saying, oh, I was in, this random third country for a period of time. Sorry, I didn't tell you, because they're actually looking at where people are at. That was a tech company, so they were pretty savvy in that. But I think having access to data and being informed is your best defense to having a nasty tax surprise that you don't want to have to deal with. The third is probably to create systems and processes where it's possible and easy for people to follow your rules and your process and to be transparent and do the right thing. So I think in practice, what that looks like is an accessible policy. So I was actually just having a chat with someone this morning who was like, we're going to allow some benefits for people for home leave, but I'm not going to publish it on a website. I'm just going to hold it. And when I feel like someone who comes in that should have it, should get it, then I'll let them know about it. I obviously didn't like that.
Sounding dodgy.
And I think that they felt like they were being the gatekeeper and it was all good. But I was like, I'm not sure that that's the sentiment that you really want to be setting. So I think it's having that policy accessible. It's having guidelines that are paired with the ability to communicate openly and effectively to the right people. And who's the right person? I think whoever is listening to this podcast is probably the right person.
100% agree.
I have a feeling that, there's a lot of people who've been, getting away with it, getting away with certain stuff, but it's only when you get caught out, you realize, hang on a second, it's not the right thing. I mean, it's the same in the the visa world, where I get people go, hey, I've been coming over on a tourist visa and doing this. It's like, hang on, it's the wrong approach. And I think that, you know, what you're saying, all this sort of stuff's eventually going to start catching up with people. So now really be, you know, in tune with it and put it in the policies and procedures, and, you know, just know the rules of the game, right?
Yeah, and you can't fault the person for not following the rules if the rules were never provided to them. So it needs to be something that's talked about and embraced by everybody. And then I think, like what we were talking, I hate to keep going back to the war that's on talent, but if you have a policy that allows flexibility or benefits, then it's just a talent attraction tool.
Yeah.
Oh, you've just like increased the complexity of my, like, hey, you want to go work in the Amazon, knock yourself out. Like, I have got this, like, now I'm like, okay, the visa side's cool, but the tax thing, that's just a whole other universe that we have to navigate.
You need to check in. Yeah, you need to make sure that,
We'll just ring you, like, Ursula, come on, let's get this happening. But I think that, you know, like, to me, it does sound like a brave new world, and it's like anything, right? It doesn't sound like a deal breaker. It just sounds like a conversation. And okay, let's be prepared. I'm going on a trip. I've got to pack my toothbrush, my passport, everything else I need to survive the trip. And this is just saying, well, you know, make sure it's a consideration, right? It doesn't sound like it's the end of the world. It's just, it is the world, and it is how we go. And as you say, life happens. And so let's just be prepared for it.
It's not a deal breaker.
No,
it's just something to be considered and to avoid a headache later.
Totally. And that's the thing, right? Like, so we might say, hey, thank you for telling us. That's great. We're going to prepare ourselves accordingly. Have fun in the Amazon. Yeah.
This is the first time I've heard of anyone deciding that they want to work from anywhere from the Amazon.
I would love to. I reckon I'd love to give it a crack. Having traveled around Australia for 8.5 months and working remotely, that was challenging. But I think that once you get there, it's a lifestyle, right? It's you know, I used to say to my kids, every day is a Monday and every day is a Saturday. Every day I'll be working, but every day I'll come and, like, see some amazing waterfall with you. That's fine. So
you message me when you get to the Amazon.
I will. It'll be a Zoom like this. Hopefully I'll have some sort of crazy reception, you know, who knows?
He'll need help with his tax bill. Well, Ursula, thank you so much. That was really informative. I've certainly taken away a lot of stuff, and even after 16 years in this industry, there's some stuff that you still surprised me with. So thank you for the insights, and I'm sure the audience got a ton of good takeaways from that one. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
I got to say, it wasn't the topic I bounced out of bed for this morning, but I've got to say, I've sort of you've changed my view. I really have got a fresh approach on it, and a new appreciation for tax nerds. Thank you.
No worries. It's tax is fun.
Yeah, and I look forward to your predictions, right? Like, we'll be having a scorecard. We'll check in every 12 months. We'll say, so did Ursula say, how's the crystal ball going?
Oh, it'd be great to connect again. Thank you all.
Exactly. Thanks so much.
Take care.